Welcome to episode 120 of the Loane Hockey Podcast. So today we're going to be talking about some standouts between last night's matchup in Nashville, where LA was taking on the Predators. And I want to talk about some players that stood out in this game, and it was a really good victory for LA. They've been off to a really good start this season thus far, and they've been rolling through the Pacific and the Western Conference so far. So they played really good hockey, and it's going to be interesting to see down the stretch of the season how they continue to get better and adapt, and how some of their players continue to improve, especially some of the young players like Brant Clark, Jordan Spence, Alex Turcotte, and so on and so forth. But with the Kings, will start with Adrian Kempe. He had a multi-point game, 2 points, a goal, and an assist, and he is really good. And he's one of the most underrated players in the league in terms of pure offensive ability. In terms of analytics, sometimes he can be misaligned with his numbers relative to his eye test, but at the same time, he's a guy that stands out in terms of offense and how he generates offense. And he's a guy who's a volume shooter, he's a volume playmaker, and he can contribute in a lot of different ways in the ozone, especially on the power play as well. And he's a real big weapon when it comes to being a dual threat player on the power play. And he's a guy that you want to rely upon as a scorer, as a goal scorer, especially. His shot is a main weapon of his, and it's his biggest toolkit when it comes to his ability and how he can shoot the puck with pace and velocity and how he can shoot up high on goalies. And he's been really good to start the season. Brant Clark, as mentioned, a guy with Drew Doughty out, he's gotten more ice time and he's looked really good to start the season. I'm not really surprised by that at all. I feel like the timing of Doughty's injury, in a sense, was good for him. Obviously, not good that the injury happened, but good for Clark in the sense that he can actually play more and he can adapt his role inside a top four type offensive role and also a defensive role when necessary. And he's a guy who is looking to make that next step in his career and obviously drafted high a couple of years prior. And they're looking for him to take that next step. And he's shown that thus far. He's showing that he can play a two-way game in top 4 minutes. And he's a guy that can be relied upon. He's really good with his feet. He's really good at escaping pressure on breakouts and on exit scenarios with his feet. And he's really skilled walking the line with his feet in the ozone and how he can maneuver laterally and stuff like that. And Clark's a guy you want to rely upon offensively and his activation habits. And he's a very big activation driven defenseman who can activate on the walls, he can activate on diagonals in the ozone, and he can activate in ways that throws coverage off, and not only with his feet, but also just his instinctive ability to read the situation. And he's a guy that's looked really good as well. Philip Deneau, he had 1 assist in this game, and he looked really good in terms of off puck instincts. I didn't notice him as much on the puck, but with his off puck play and his anticipation, his reading of space, and how he can interpret that, I feel like that's one of his biggest components to his game and why he signed in LA and why LA wanted him is because he can be an off puck support player who can be really detailed defensively and he can play an elite shutdown role. So he's a guy that's more reliable off the puck than he is on it, but at the same time, you're still getting some offensive ability and some playmaking ability out of him. It's just more a matter of how much and how consistently he can actually provide those numbers and be consistent in that role. And so he's a guy that stood out defensively. I noticed him a lot in that sense yesterday and how he was able to, like I said, anticipate space, read space, and be able to shut lanes down defensively. Kevin Fiala looked really good against his former team, that being the Nashville Predators, where he played for the first stages of his career. Then he went to Minnesota, and then now obviously in LA. And Fiala, ever since, because he started his career as more of a checking type player, he had some skill to his game, but he started his career in Nashville as more of a checker. And it's kind of funny how the turntables have flipped a little bit, where Fiala now he's more of a shooter and a playmaker than he is a checker. So with Fiala, he is really skilled in small areas. His decision making has really improved in small areas. I wrote about it in my newsletter today about how there is a situation where he was coming underneath the puck to be able to support it and coming underneath the play to support it. He did a really good job timing that and timing his route so that he can build speed speed underneath the puck and then be able to gain speed when he got the retrieval. So it was a really nice route timing ability from him to come back in the neutral zone on the delayed offside sequence, and then that eventually led to his goal. But I noticed Fiala so much more, even then in Minnesota. I've noticed him a lot in Minnesota, but I've noticed him a lot more in LA now. And I feel like in LA, he almost has his own identity in a sense because in Minnesota, he was trying to adapt to playing with Kaprizov, and he wasn't necessarily the marquee guy there because Kaprizov was just coming in at the time. And then now in LA, Fiala has created more of his own identity as a borderline superstar. I would say he's a superstar at this point in the league and how he's played and how he's continued to be consistent as a point per game player. And he's been really good. He was really good yesterday as well. And then Anze Kopitar, who had a goal, looked really good, similar to in terms of two-way habits and how he's able to shut plays down, how he's able to do that. And he's very consistent at doing that. He's done that for a long time in his career. And then offensively, his ability to get to spaces on time and be able to use his hockey sense to get to really key areas is his biggest benefit when it comes to his hockey sense and his timing and how he's able to understand his routes. And that's a big asset when it comes to him and how he's able to leverage that. And he was really good yesterday overall as well. And then in terms of Nashville side, I actually like Luke Evangelista. I know they got shut out yesterday, but I liked Evangelista's game once again, and I feel like he's taken a next step in his career, and he's looked really good. He's looked really good off the puck. He's looked really good on the puck as well, being not necessarily a marquee dual threat type player just yet, but a guy who can be reliable as a dual threat style player who can score. He can score from hard areas. He can score from tight areas around the crease. He can score from afar because he's got a good shot and he's got good velocity on his shot. And at the same time, he's got really good passing ability, and he showed that on the power play and also 5-on-5. And there's been times where he's been on that first unit on the power play. He's kind of gelled in there thus far, and he's looked really good on that first unit when he's gotten those reps on occasion. So he's going to be a player to watch for Nashville throughout the rest of the season, and he's been good. Alex Carrier, I've liked his game and very steady defenseman ever since joining Nashville consistently in a full-time role and a guy who plays very mature style game on exits, on breakouts, on D zone retrievals. He's analytically advanced as a defenseman. The analytics support and back up his ability, so that's another really good sign. And he's relatively inexpensive for Nashville in terms of cap and the average annual value on his deal. So that's also helpful when it comes to him because he's a guy who's very reliable, very steady, analytically inclined, and also at the same time, he balances that out with his eye test. The eye test shows that he's very consistent. The eye test shows that he can be a consistent player, not only on breakouts, but through neutral zone transitioning and being able to transition pucks with pace and being able to gain the zone offensively and stuff like that. Not a marquee offensive defenseman, but a steady two-way and leans more towards the shutdown side, but more of a two-way guy in that sense. But I've liked his game and I've liked the steadiness that he brings to Nashville's blue line. And he's a guy that's very reliable and can support any D partner that he plays with really well. And then Mark Del Gaizo is another guy I've actually really liked throughout the season, and he's been up and down between Milwaukee and Nashville thus far, but at the same time, he showed some ability in more of a bottom pairing type role, more of a depth role, where he can move pucks, he can outlet pucks, he can move pucks with pace. He's very reliable as a puck moving defenseman, and when he gets the puck, he's going to look to move it fast. He's not necessarily puck possession oriented in the NHL just yet, I feel like when it comes to his game over time, there's just a consistency factor that needs to be adapted in order for him to take that next step in terms of being able to be a play driver and a puck possession oriented defenseman. But at the same time, he showcases really good and steady two-way play, and he's very engaged in terms of his ability around the puck as well. Zach Leroux is a guy who I've really liked ever since he was drafted, and he was drafted in the middle of the draft where when he was picked a couple years prior, and with Leheru, he's a guy who plays a bottom six checking role, but can play up and down all four lines if you want him to, because he's very reliable as a guy who can bring a skill game, a power game, and also a two-way game. So you have those three elements in his game that makes him somewhat of a lethal threat. It's just more comes down to his play driving elements and if he's able to get that consistent ice time. But with him, he hits a lot of things in sight. He hits almost everything he sees, and he's going to hit everyone. So he's very physical. He's very adaptable in terms of his checking game as well. He hits everybody, but he's smart with his checking game as well, especially when he's forechecking and being able to be tenacious on the forecheck. So a guy who finishes his checks really well. He brings a really good foundation with his overall skill set, and at the same time, it'll be interesting to see how he also takes that next step in his career. Nashville, they're interesting because they're slightly on the older side when you look at their top six and you look at their back end and even their goaltending as well. But at the same time, it's interesting because they have a weird mix of younger players who are trying to make it and on the brink, and some are going up and down between Milwaukee, and some are trying to find a consistent role, like Evangelista, and then you have Lee Huru, and then you have Del Gaizo, and some of these other guys who are trying to find that consistent ice time, that consistent role within this team and within this veteran style team. And then obviously having the additions of Marcia Show and Stamkos haven't paid off for the full success of the team just yet early on in the season, but at the same time, there's plenty more games to go. It'll be interesting to see if Nashville does get out of this slump and how they do it. So a lot of good standouts from this game.